Welcome to the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. I'm your host, Kate Powell. In a world where humans who feel vibrant, whole, and fully alive seem to be increasingly rare, where burnout and brokenness seem to be increasingly the norm, both in individuals and our larger ecosystems, it seems worth exploring how did we get here? And more importantly, what perspectives or what cultural practices or what spiritual, ancestral, or animist wisdom processes might help us stay true to the spark and rhythm of our aliveness on this wild, heartbreaking, but ultimately rare and precious life. Thank you for being here. May these conversations help us to stay human in the face of dehumanizing forces. May they nourish our wild, tender hearts, and may they plant seeds which flourish into a more regenerative and vibrant future. Hey, Kate here with Wild Sacred Journey. So this is a bonus episode in honor of the fall equinox here in the Northern Hemisphere, spring equinox in the Southern Hemisphere. So the equinoxes, remember, are these balance points of light and dark. And it's important to honor, I think, these sort of marked moments of the season, these nature rhythm holidays, these seasonal holidays, because part of the reason our ancestors did that was to stay in tune with the rhythm of aliveness. So I think part of when we get into burnout, part of why we end up with these epidemics of burnout that we're in right now is because we're not actually living in season with aliveness anymore, in rhythm with aliveness anymore, and out of rhythm with the seasons. So we've been going, you know, and then we end up in these completely desiccated, burnt out kind of spaces, right? And that's because we're living with this linear, it's more like a pendulum swing, swinging back and forth. So it's like we can go and then we literally can't go anymore and we crash and we swing all the way back the other way, right? And it keeps going back and forth. Now, if we're living more in rhythm with the seasons, with the cycles, it's actually cyclical. Cyclical. Here we go. Those are the words. I'm having a lot of trouble with words today. I'll just preface that right now, so I apologize. It's going to be a fun episode. But there's this sense that the sun rises and then the sun sets. And we have a balance of night and we have a balance of dark. And there are seasons where there is more light than there is dark. And there are seasons where there is more dark than there is light. And there are these moments where there's equal balance between the two. So it's not that as we're trying to recover balance after burnout, it's not that we're looking for some specific point, that if we can just find that point of balance and stick with it, we'll all be all good, right? Because that's just stillness, that's stagnancy, that's actually a form of death. And really more a form of vacancy, actually, because it's not even death, because death is part of the cycle of aliveness, right? So, you know, we honor these equinox moments, these balance moments, because they're thresholds as we move towards in and out of extremes gradually. So a beautiful story to represent that, of course, is the abduction of the abduction of Persephone. Oh my goodness. So Persephone, daughter of Demeter and Zeus, is out. She's beautiful. Demeter, of course, is the goddess of harvest, which equinox is all about the harvest. This is the time when the last of the harvest and the foraging is kind of being brought in. The preparation for the cold, dark months is coming. We're celebrating reaping what we've sown, or starting to look ahead to what are we going to do in the cold months. How are we setting ourselves up for that, which we kind of started back in August. I had a podcast episode talking about that at Lunasa. But now we're really in the reel of it, right? The harvest is actually winding down towards the end of September here. And, and we're really starting to recognize that the seasons are shifting. It's feeling, the air is getting crisper, it's feeling cooler. And getting darker, it's staying darker longer. We're starting to notice that shift. So there's a celebration and also a preparation. So in the myth, right, Demeter, the goddess of harvest, loves her daughter Persephone. Persephone's out picking wildflowers one day when Hades, the god of the underworld, sees her. And Hades falls madly in love with beautiful Persephone. And so he abducts her and takes her down into the underworld. Now, Demeter is heartbroken that her daughter is missing. And so she lets all the crops fail, right? It rains with her tears. It floods everything out. Everything dries up then once it's flooded, and rots and dies. And, so there's flooding and desiccation and all kinds of things, right? And Zeus says, okay, well, this is never going to work, because then the humans will die. And if the humans will die, who will worship me? Because we can always count on Zeus to be quite full of himself. So he sends Hermes, the messenger god, down to the underworld to see what he can do to get Persephone back. Now, apparently, some say Persephone knew that you couldn't eat in the underworld, because if you ate food in the underworld, you'd never come back again. And that's actually a common theme that we even see in a lot of Celtic legends and things, stories about the fae people, the good people, the fairies, if you end up in the underworld with them, don't eat any food or you can't leave. So in any case, Persephone's been trying to not eat, but, days passed and she's getting so hungry. And so finally she eats 6 small pomegranate seeds, right? Hoping that will somehow help her. And also perhaps losing hope that she'll ever see the light of day again. But of course we know that this won't do, because Demeter is not going to let anything grow with her daughter gone. So Hermes and Zeus end up striking a deal with Hades and Demeter. So they end up with a deal that Persephone spends 6 months of the year, 1 month for each of the pomegranate seeds. She spends down in the underworld with Hades, queen of the underworld. And then the other 6 months she's back above ground with her mother Demeter. And so that's part of the story of that season, of that right rhythm, that right relationship between the light and the dark. And this understanding that, that there's actually a balance that's struck between those. So that's how we have spring and summer, when Persephone is above ground and Demeter is happy to have her daughter with her. And then we have the fall and winter as she starts to go back down, and spring being the entrance point where Persephone returns, fall being the point where Persephone leaves her mother. So, I just offer that story as sort of an image to kind of sit with for yourself in this moment where, if you're in the northern hemisphere, Persephone is going underground and we're about to enter, this marks the moment where we're entering that darker cycle. And it hasn't reached its peak yet, but we're moving in that direction. And then the moment where, if you're in the southern hemisphere, where Persephone is coming back up above ground. And I think it's important to honor these moments too. Part of the reason we honor transitions, burnout becomes a problem when we aren't paying attention to it soon enough. And so it doesn't, the signs usually have been there for a while, but we've been ignoring them. We haven't felt like we had the time or the space to listen, or, we felt like something bad would happen if they did, or we were just so big in whatever rhythm we were in that we just didn't even notice, until we suddenly can't go any further, until that pendulum has swung so far that it's reached the end and it just has to come crashing back, So if we pay attention to these transition moments, these moments before something reaches its peak, the moments of where it almost seems like there's a stillness, they're very quiet, they're very subtle. But if we pay attention to those moments and we practice paying attention to those moments, then we can actually practice paying attention to our own signs that we're about to need to shift. We're about to need to go from moving in this full out kind of way into something that's quieter, before life kicks us back into something that's quieter through a disease, through, getting fired from our job, through the ending of a relationship, through, right? Like, these things happen and we're like, oh my God, and while they can be very destabilizing, and I'm certainly not, I don't mean to minimize that. If we're paying attention, those usually correspond with moments that where we needed to slow down, and we'd been ignoring the signs for a long time. When I used to teach yoga, I was teaching more of a vinyasa yoga, more of the flow yoga, and it was fascinating. Part of why I loved flow yoga was because, and more of that style, I'm gonna walk a little, the mosquitoes have found me. They haven't died yet. I won't mind when they go back to the underworld. But yeah, so part of the reason I liked teaching that flow was that, I think often we think of yoga as being about the poses. And the thing with more of a vinyasa style yoga is that the transitions between the poses are just as important as the poses. And it was always interesting to sort of see how much the class's energy would often drop between the poses. Like, okay, I'm in the pose. Oh, okay, now we're moving out of the pose. And there'd just be this, there'd just be a drop in intention, in presence, in focus, because it somehow seemed like the transition mattered less than the arrival in the pose. And I would see that in my own practice, and I would see that in my students' bodies. And so, it became really important to me at that time, and it still is in my life, to practice transitions, to practice noticing the subtle signs that something is shifting before we have to get hit over the head with a 2x4. So I invite you this autumn equinox to sort of maybe sit with that a moment. What is transitioning in your life because you need rest? How can you start to set yourself up for more rest? And also within that then, what are you, what do you need to get rid of? What do you need to clear space for? I did that episode on clearing space and burnout and why that's important. So what do you need to kind of clear space around so that you can actually take your rest that's coming? And how is what you are living right now the harvest of something you've sown? So what are the actions, the beliefs, the assumptions, the dynamics that you've made or, been engaged in that have led you to the place where you are now? And again, not that there's necessarily anything that is wrong with any of those things per se, but it's a question of, it's a question of quantity, really. It's a question of intention and quantity. So just taking a moment to kind of come back to center. My brain went in too many directions at once. So it's not that there's anything wrong inherently with the things that got you to where you are now, but this is that what you reap, you harvest, what you sow, you harvest kind of thing, right? So if we're not happy, if there's a dissatisfaction within us around the lives that we're leading, or how the lives that we're leading are leaving us feeling, or how aspects of the lives that we're leaving are leading us feeling, it's worth it to take a moment to ask, okay, why is this what I'm harvesting? What have I been sowing that this is what I'm harvesting? And so this might be a great time to start to do that, especially because then as we go into the dark parts of the year, into the more quiet, restful, introspective times of the year, that's a great time to get into doing some shadow work, which is really just a fancy word for looking inward a little bit more and tending to the parts of us that have been relegated to the edges. So, and if you're in the Southern Hemisphere and you're going into the brighter days, then, your inquiry would be more along the lines of, what is blooming in my life right now, and that I want to keep tending and nourishing, or what am I trying to bring with me from this restful period? How do I need to set myself up for a successful, what foundations would it be helpful to lay now, so that as things continue to get more vibrant, more alive, more full on, I can kind of feel like I've set myself up for success with that as much as possible. And what seeds am I planting right now, knowing that I will harvest them later? What do I imagine the outcome will be of the things I'm doing now, of the beliefs I'm holding right now, of the assumptions I'm making right now, of the dynamics and relationships I'm investing in right now, that sort of thing. So, because then your work is going to be less maybe about shadow work, although we each also have our own smaller cycles and seasons within the larger ones. So sometimes we're completely attuned to it, and sometimes our personal rhythm is maybe a little bit different. But it's still good to kind of notice, be able to track the rhythms and where we are within them, within ourselves and then within the larger world. But, for those in the Southern Hemisphere moving into more of the full onness, yours is going to be a little bit less about shadow work perhaps, and a little bit more about relational work, the being out and about in the world with other humans, with the beyond human kin, with all of that. So yeah, less about dreaming, more about living. So, all right. Happy equinox. May it be a beautiful pause moment for you in this season. And let me know if you have any questions or if this stirred anything for you. I'd love to hear. And let's see, when this comes out, we'll be just about 1 week out from Sanctuary. So if you're liking these types of conversations, Sanctuary is my offering. It's a once a month meeting. We commit to 6 months together at a time. And so we'll be starting our next cohort at the end of September. It'll be the final September of the month. This cohort will meet on the final Septembers of the month, or final Sundays, of the month. And those are, they're very much come as you are kind of spaces. It's not about learning a whole lot or doing a whole lot in the sense of it's not content, but we do talk about these sorts of rhythms with the natural world. We use stories like I just did with Persephone to kind of explore certain myths and archetypes. And it's just a beautiful space to just kind of connect with other humans who want to have these types of conversations. So, and especially, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere and are going into the quiet part of the year, this might be a really sweet time to kind of gather with us around the virtual hearth on Zoom. And we'll light some candles and talk and be together, connect with each other, tell some stories, and tune into this rhythm of aliveness in the way that it's showing up for us now. So you'd be most welcome to join us if that speaks to you. You can find more information on my website, and I'll put a link in the show notes too. So, and if you're feeling like you're in a deep shadow work part of your journey, then that might be time for some one-on-one work with me, and I'm happy to share more about that with you if you're interested. So, all right, well, I will see you next time, and feel free to share this, of course, and that always helps spread the word and get people back from burnout into more aliveness and into a different kind of relationship with the world around us and ourselves. So, all right, much love.